Welcome to Como, Italy, and the Italian lake by the same name, north of Milan. My name is Judy, and I love travel, history, and finding out how the two intersect. On my last full day in Milan, I scheduled what I thought was going to be a very easy day. A bus tour to Como, a ride on one of the many tour boats plying gorgeous Lake Como, and a walk around Bellagio. We met up at the tourist service office, quite a distance from the hotel, but which had the virtue of finally forcing me to learn how to use the local metro system. It was quite easy, with stops close enough to where I was starting and from where I had to go to really save some miles on my walking shoes. From there, we climbed aboard a very new coach and set off for the 31-mile trip to the city. I thought this was going to be a very easy day and not terribly interesting, mostly a boat ride, but that turned out to be quite wrong. I had time to take a very good look at the city before boarding one of the many tour boats chugging their way up and down the lake. First, however, I found the nearest cafe, plunked down €1.50 for an espresso, which also gave me access to a notably clean restroom, and refueled myself for the day to come. Sit back and join me today for a city tour of Como, Italy. When we first drove close to Como, it was quite cloudy and most unpromising. This was my first view of the city of the lake, a rather muddy and disappointing photo shot through the windows of our bus. I have to admit, I wasn't too happy about it. My opinion changed rather quickly once I got off that bus and could see what it really looked like, as shown in this photo from Wikimedia Commons. I decided I could make the best of it by having a walk through the city. Como is actually a very old city and originally wasn't even built here at the mouth of the lake around the 1st century BCE. The Romans took over and built their town up in the hills. The hills were and are quite pretty, but the Romans had more practical reasons for settling there. The area where present-day Como sits was a swamp, and the Romans knew it was unhealthy, even if they didn't understand the exact mechanism of it. Julius Caesar had the then swamp at the southern tip of the lake drained and moved the city downhill to a walled city with a Roman street grid. He called it Novum Comum, and the name stuck. Como was actually a Roman city, not uncommon as we're fairly close to Rome, although much closer to Milan, and amounted to around 300 modern American acres. There was a wall and gates, although all evidence of Roman settlement seems to be gone, replaced by modern and a few still standing medieval buildings, including the 3 churches we'll visit today and what was once City Hall. When you look at a tourist map, you can see traces of the Roman city, basically the areas surrounding my thumb in this photo. It still retains a typical street plan, which was a standard feature of Roman imperial era city planning. My first stop, and one that I really didn't appreciate because it was barely mentioned on the back of the tourist map, was the ancient Corticella Quarter. The area got its name from a road by the same name that ran through here. This is a rabbit warren, as you can see, of narrow streets and alleyways. In the old days, it actually provided a route to the Piazza Cavour, which was Como's port until it was built over in 1869. The area centered around the Church of San Nazaro, which was built on the site of the ancient Roman basilica, and that tells me that this must have been the area where the Roman Imperial Forum had sat. The church was said to house a splinter of the True Cross as well as a tooth from St. Andrew. I traipsed through this ancient neighborhood with narrow alleyways, took a few pictures, and found out it was extremely easy to get lost. For centuries, the area deteriorated until it was inhabited only by the poorest families in the city and was in very poor physical, not to mention hygienic condition. That all changed in 1937 when the authorities decided to demolish and rebuild it. Bits and pieces of the medieval neighborhood live on in the form of a couple of building fronts and this reconstructed ancient fresco. It's now rather trendy and filled with restaurants, bars, and cafes. The big ticket item here in the city for most day trippers is the Piazza del Duomo, shown here in a street view from Google Maps, which provides the front yard of the cathedral, what used to be the city hall, and a rather impressive clock tower. Looks, especially from street level, can be quite deceiving. The piazza is actually fairly narrow, and no amount of neck craning would disclose the rather impressive design of the rest of the cathedral. The facade you see here in the center bears some resemblance to the cathedral in Milan, complete with an enormous rose window and a multitude of decorative statues inside and out, although it is, of course, quite a bit smaller. Neither the building with the 4 arches nor the bell tower are actually part of the cathedral. They're all just jumbled together. I'll show them to you after we visit the church. This cathedral is sometimes described as the last Gothic cathedral built in Italy. Construction began on the site of an earlier Romanesque-style cathedral in 1396, or about a decade or so after work had begun on the Milan Cathedral. We're several blocks away from Corticella Quarter, which I believe might have been the site of the original Roman Forum. So this, despite its immense age, is actually new construction. Like all cathedrals, building this took a while, but finally finished up in 1770. Record time if you compare it to the Cathedral of Milan. The imposing west front of the cathedral dates from 1457 or so and features a glorious rose window. You can see it pictured here from both outside and inside, as well as a gateway decorated with statues of Pliny the Elder and Pliny the Younger, both natives of the city. Like the cathedral in Milan, this building is decorated with a large number of statues on the outside. The wide view you see here is courtesy of Google Earth and shows us the main entryway from the piazza, as well as the glassed-in statues of Pliny the Elder on the left and the Younger on the right. I'd normally expect statues placed so prominently on a church to be of a religious or saintly nature, perhaps a bow to a local bishop if not a saint, but these two are strictly secular. Their subject dates from well before Christianity was a popular thing here in the city. These two men, an uncle and his nephew, were a powerhouse writing and administrative combination from the days of the Roman Empire. When you look at the statues, you can see that each one is shown with a scroll, probably meant to represent their scribblings. The stone is a bit beaten up and has been repaired, but these two are still where they were designed to be, outside the cathedral. The authorities have encased them in glass so they are safe. The statue of Uncle Pliny on the left is much safer than he was when he was still alive. Pliny wrote an encyclopedic book on natural history, which became the model for modern encyclopedias. He spent most of his spare time studying, reading other men's accounts and writing, but apparently he went off and did his own personal investigations out in the field. Vespasian gave him command of a fleet and stationed him at Misenum in the Bay of Naples. And erupting Vesuvius, which he would have seen since he was less than 30 miles away, could have been just his thing. The most common is he got a message from his friend Rectina, who was stranded in Stabiae during the eruption, and he organized a rescue mission. The story goes that he boarded one of the galleys for the 22-odd-mile trip. Either on the way there or on the way back, he died, either from a heart attack or an asthma attack, or possibly he smothered from the fumes let loose by the erupting volcano. His nephew, Pliny the Younger, shown here on the right, cradling his own scroll, was a lawyer, an author, and magistrate. Nephew apparently did not inherit uncle's curiosity bump. He was more of an administrator and a letter writer. His letters, mostly to and from his then emperor, form the basis for many of the accounts of Roman administrative history and everyday life in the 1st century AD. Among them is the one in which he describes the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, which he watched from a distance, and which killed his uncle. The inside of this cathedral isn't just impressive for its decorations, it's also a bit surprising. I mentioned that when you come in the main entrance, because of the way the town has grown up around the cathedral, you really have no idea of how large it is or its general configuration, shown here in this image from Google Earth. This is the main aisle, looking toward the apse, which was literally invisible from the narrow piazza facing the front entrance. The detailed photo of the inner roof shows the rich decorative detail, as well as a glimpse on the right of a second stained glass window. The last detail I want to show you here is one of the tapestries. This one shows us the presentation of the Virgin Mary in the temple, and is said to have been woven in Belgium and date from the 16th century. I was actually a little surprised it wasn't protected behind a glass casing. The multicolored confection you see here, tucked between the clock tower and the cathedral, is called the broletto. Its style and coloration tell us this wasn't ever a part of the church at all. A broletto in medieval Italy was the place where the whole population met for democratic assemblies and where the elected men lived and administered justice. As you can see, it sits several steps down from today's ground level. Initially, the building was larger than you see now, although it was still attached to the clock tower. When the authorities tore down the predecessor of today's cathedral, they wanted a bigger space, so they whacked off part of the broletto to make room. Today, the colonnade still is made up of red, gray, and white marble. The portico is used to host public assemblies and is now the seat of the Tourist Information Office. It's also a handy spot to sit down in the shade and consult a guidebook or a map or just rest your feet. The final part of this delightful composite confection is a rather sturdy-looking bell and clock tower, shown here attached to the Broletto. Like the Broletto, the attached clock tower was secular, not religious. The idea was for citizens to gather in front of the Broletto, and they were called to do so by a bell installed in this tower. Hardly anything of interest dates from before the medieval period here in the city. This is fairly modern. It's the Palazzo Terragni. It was designed by an Italian architect named Giuseppe Terragni as the Casa del Fascio, or House of the Fascists, and was built from reinforced concrete between 1932 and 1936. The style is called Italian Rational. It's quite modern looking and actually sort of sticks out. After the fall of fascism, it was still a sturdy and useful structure in a post-World War II world where building materials remained scarce. It's been used for several purposes since, and in 1957 became the headquarters of the local finance police, I think that means the taxman, who still occupy it to this day. This is the Basilica of San Fedele. It's a Romanesque-style church dating back to 1120 and is dedicated to Saint Fidelis of Como. Although you wouldn't know it from a ground-level inspection, this aerial view shows you that the building and the bell tower are quite substantial. This didn't start out as a church dedicated to Saint Fidelis. Today's building is actually on the site of a 7th century church originally dedicated to a different saint named Euphemia. In 964 AD, the relics of San Fedele were transferred to this church, and the dedication was changed from Saint Euphemia to San Fedele. The most interesting exterior feature of the decorations is around these doors, featuring a dragon, clearly visible on the left in this photograph, but missing, as far as I could tell, any reference to a dragon-killing saint. Fidelis was an Italian soldier saint, at least according to Christian tradition. There are two stories about him which are quite different from one another. The first story goes that he was a Roman soldier stationed in Milan. He apparently helped some Christian prisoners escape and was murdered for his efforts. A second story, and according to Catholic Saints Online, far more likely, is that he was a Christian missionary sent by the then Bishop of Milan to convert the still pagan area here around Lake Como, and here is where he met his death. We don't really know much about his background except that he was apparently well educated and said to have been a lawyer before he became a Christian missionary. Fidelis is the patron saint of lawyers. His relics are now kept inside a marble sarcophagus beneath the 14th century high altar, which you can see in this photograph. I thought the most interesting fresco here in the church was one of a time-traveling Madonna and Child, with a side of Saint Sebastian complete with arrows, and another saint whose name was Roche. I knew a bit about Sebastian, shown here on the left, pierced with arrows for his faith, but Saint Roche was a new one on me. He's portrayed in what appears to be medieval dress, with his hose down and what appears to be a gaping wound in his right thigh. This was just too odd for me not to look it up. Even Catholic Saints Online was pretty doubtful on this one, but it informed me that the claim was that he was from somewhere in the south of France, son of a royal governor, who decided to go on a pilgrimage to Rome and devoted himself to caring for victims of a plague then ravaging Italy. He became a victim himself, but managed to recover, and is said to have performed many miracles of healing. Eventually he went back home, but he was arrested as a spy and locked up by his uncle, now the governor, who didn't recognize him. Roche died in prison and was only identified as the former governor's son by a birthmark in the form of a cross on his chest. When miracles were reported about his intercession, even after his death, a popular cult developed, and he's invoked against pestilence and plague. He's also the patron saint of invalids. As for that mark on his thigh, I never could confirm what that was supposed to be. The Chiesa di San Giacomo, or Church of St. James, is the last Catholic church that we're going to visit here in Como. The original construction probably dates back to the 11th century. I snapped a few quick pics. The pillars probably date back to the original construction and are clearly Romanesque in design, but the frescoes are somewhat more modern. I knew there was a much better-known church by the same name in Bellagio, and I was on a deadline. And with St. James, it was time to head back to the boat basin. Since I generally travel solo, there rarely are photos of me, but an obliging fellow traveler took this one. Thank you for joining me to visit lovely Como, Italy. Come back next time for part 2, the boat ride on Lake Como and Bellagio.